I have been asked from time to time why I ever became a judge. My response is that being married with 2 daughters, I had to have some place in the world I'd be in charge. It was most assuredly not at home. When my eldest was 16, she said, that black robe doesn't mean a thing here. You've heard a bit about my bio, so you know I'm both a retired Army colonel and a retired federal immigration judge. And not a lot of continuity between those 2 roles. I did start out as an infantry officer and ultimately a combat aviator in the Vietnam War, but after 2 combat tours, I pretty well determined that my luck had run its course. So after a brief flirtation with going to the airlines to fly, which didn't work out, I elected to become a born-again coward and go to law school, where nobody would shoot at me anymore. It should be noted that when I did finish law school and re-entered the Army paid for my law school. And I just had to come back on active duty as a judge advocate. And when I did, I reported into Fort Stewart, Georgia, and I was all set to get a file and a case and become a lawyer like I learned about in law school. And the judge advocate of the office said, this is a perfect job for you. And I said, what is that, sir? And he said, well, you're an ex-Ranger. He said, we're going to make you the legal advisor to the 1st and 75th Ranger Battalion. And I thought, Lord God, I'm tired of jumping out of airplanes. But, in any event, when I did 12 years as a military judge. So I spent virtually the greater part of my JAG career as a courtroom lawyer or a judge. I did 12 death penalty cases, capital cases. And when I got ready to retire, I was fortunate enough to be nominated to become a federal immigration judge. And I was a bit surprised because I couldn't spell INS. I didn't know. And I talked to the folks who were supporting me for this, and I mentioned this is somewhat of a foreign subject for me. And they said, well, you know how to run a courtroom. You can learn the law. I'm sure you can take care of all that. So, and I learned very quickly at how incredibly convoluted and contradictory the immigration laws of the United States are. They make the Internal Revenue Code look like a clear and simple read. It's just, it's unbelievable. The Immigration and Nationality Act, as we see it today, was passed in the 1950s, but it's been amended over 60 times. And when you do amendments like that over time without stopping and figuring out what to do with it and starting over again, it just becomes a patchwork quilt. And so it's not an easy body of law for lawyers, judges, let alone the public and those folks who are seeking relief from it. But it's not an easy body of law to learn. It is probably appropriate that I pause for a moment and admit and explain my personal bias when it comes to immigration issues. As an Osage Indian, I am absolutely convinced that if we'd stopped the Mayflower at the Atlantic, Coronado at the Texas border, and the Russians in Alaska, we'd still own this damn place. But that's another story, and we're going to fix that. We hear ad nauseum this mantra that we are a nation of immigrants. And while technically true, the tenor and tone and tint of such a mantra suggests that a period of time in our history where everything was euphoric and anybody who wanted to come here could be here and stay here, and it didn't matter where you were from or what you've done. Bullhug. It's not true and never has been true. We have, from our colonial days through our early statehood days, we have been a nation that restricts immigration, and not for always the most honorable reasons. For a lengthy period of time, we only let Europeans into this nation, and for a long period of time, only Europeans from certain countries. The Chinese Exclusion Act, which was passed shortly after the railroads were completed and we no longer needed their labor, barred Asians, essentially, from coming to the United States, and it was not taken away until World War II. So we've had a long history of restricting who could come here. And what you had to do in order to be here. And so when folks came here, got on the boat, went into Ellis Island, it doesn't mean that they could stay here, even then. The restrictions suggested that if they didn't meet certain requirements or had certain issues in their background or had certain health issues, they were sent away. Now, yes, restrictions were lessened way back when because the country wasn't full. And with the exception of the problem of the Indians who kind of got in the way, we had a country to fill. And so we were eager to have people come in. But we fast forward today and we know that we still have restrictions on who can come to and live in our nation. It's important to first understand that just because a person wants to come here doesn't mean they can be here. There are 4 basic ways that a person can immigrate lawfully to the United States. One is sponsorship by a family member. When we're talking about family-related sponsorship, when you hear them say chain migration, that's what that means. And the question becomes, when you talk about chain migration, how expansive can we permit family members to be brought in under the sponsorship of a given family member who's already here? The second is employment-based, or now as they're calling it, merit-based. And we already have that, but it's relatively small. It's cumbersome. It's difficult to get here. You've got to have sponsorship from an employer. A person cannot apply under the current law to come here under an employment-related immigration visa. Some company in the United States has to sponsor them to be here and come here. And they have to meet all sorts of criteria. The third area, and by the way, when it comes to employment-related visas, they're not all permanent. Some of them only permit them to be here for a certain short period of time, and some of them can convert from a labor visa into permanent residency. So again, it's a patchwork quilt. The third is the diversity lottery, which you've heard mentioned on a great deal lately. And that was created in the early 1960s when it was believed that we were still too restrictive and certain parts of the world were not getting the opportunities to immigrate here. And so the way the diversity lottery works is I live in Ghana and I go down to the embassy or the consulate and I apply for the diversity lottery. And then they have a lottery. 55,000 people a year can come into the United States under the diversity lottery. They select about 110,000 people. And so they notify 110,000 people, and by golly, you better get on the stick because it lasts for the duration of the fiscal year. And if you don't get in and are one of the 55,000 by the end of the fiscal year, it starts all over again. You don't carry over, you've lost the lottery. But it's 55,000 folks a year, and that's been going on for quite a while. You also hear that discussed in terms of folks who want to end that. You don't have to have a relationship. You don't have to be able to demonstrate that you can support yourself. So it's controversial. And the last major category are refugees. And we accept the amount of refugees we get to take on a given year is determined by the president. And typically we take in between 55,000 and 80,000 refugees a year. And the refugees, of course, have to be vetted in terms of background and medical health and all sorts of other, and people with criminal backgrounds, regardless of which category we're talking about. Many of those criminal offenses or backgrounds will prevent you from being admitted. A person with a drug trafficking offense in their home country can never be here. There's no exception. It doesn't matter who you're married to. You cannot live here. And again, certain physical and psychological medical issues can bar a person. And also there are a number of associations with Cubans are frequently, they're not scrutinized hard enough in many cases, but they go into great detail to the background of what organizations they might have belonged to in their youth in Cuba. And lots of folks, just to get by in Cuba, join the Communist Party, which can be a bar to being admitted to the United States, even if they have family members here. So those are the legal ways under current law that you can come here. So just picking up a bag and walking or riding north in some form of caravan, if you will, and presenting yourself at the frontier or the port of entry doesn't provide a person with an ability to enter the United States. They have no documents that permits them to be here. Okay. So they would need a visa in one of those 4 categories, and they don't have it. So the only thing such a person can do, and many of them are very well coached in it, but they're desperate people. A lot of these folks are not bad folks. They are desperate. They come from incredibly poor and violent countries. So the only thing that they can try to do as a vehicle to get over the border, if they present themselves, or into the United States further if they're caught, is to ask for asylum. And in order to be granted asylum in the United States, a person must establish a fear of what's called persecution. And it's on 5 very specific grounds and no other: race, religion, nationality, political issues, and or membership in a social group. That's the area that folks who are seeking asylum try to come into. They try to suggest, well coached or not, real or not, that their particular situation, their economic issues, their fear of gang violence, their domestic violence issues, put them in a position such that they should be considered to be in a recognized social group that qualifies for asylum. And it virtually never works. The first 4 groups are pretty easy: race, religion, nationality, membership in a political organization. Those are pretty easy to define and address. But if you don't have that, then you're trying to take your very real, factual issues affecting you in Honduras, with gangs running the streets and people being extorted constantly, and rapes and horrible domestic violence. You're trying to shoehorn those into the definition of what constitutes persecution on the basis of membership in that social group. And less than 1% of those who actually go to court and have their cases heard ever are successful in it. Nonetheless, that's really all they can try to do. Economic impact or economic limitations have never been recognized as fitting within the social group definition. And the last Attorney General significantly, he negated a complete line of precedent cases regarding domestic violence and gang activity, and indicated and directed that those standards be followed in adjudicating asylum cases, and further limiting the ability of such folks to win. But the issue down there isn't whether you win. The issue is, can you get over the border, and can you get into a detention facility, and can your case be adjudicated in the amount of time the courts currently require. And if you have a family member with you, that time period is 20 days in detention. Folks, there are 900,000 immigration cases currently pending in backlog in the immigration courts of the United States, and there's about 360 federal immigration judges. The date I retired, the date I walked out of the office and cleaned out my desk, I had 1,800 cases pending on my docket. I talked to my clerk of court about a month ago. There were 5 judges in my court in Dallas when I was there and left. The judges, now there are 9, I believe. I think she said 9. They each have 2,800 cases currently pending on their dockets. So that's just dealing with not what's the million folks that are coming in this year illegally. That's the folks that are already on the backlog. So what the goal is to be able to get over the border, come in. They don't have to get caught. They'll run up to a border patrol agent and turn themselves in. Please process me, because they can only hold them so long. And then they got another bunch coming in. They've only got a lot of bids, but not that can address 1 million people potentially that are coming. And then they release them. They ship their case to the nearest immigration court, nearest to where they say they're going. And for the vast majority, they are never heard from again. That's current catch and release. And they're trying not to catch and release, but their hands are tied by the courts. They can't do anything else. In the Obama administration, they had real catch and release. They didn't even do anything more than process the paperwork and send them on their way. When I was still on the bench during the Obama administration, and they were making such a big deal about catch and release, nobody was showing up at court. Anyway, I had a boss who wanted me to go down and hear a bunch of cases down on the border, and what was happening is they'd schedule 200 cases in a day, and 196 people wouldn't show up, and you're done in 2 hours. And so I said to him, I said, this doesn't make any sense. I said, why don't you schedule 500 cases in a given day? I'll do it by televideo from Dallas, Texas to Harlingen, Texas. And I can, if nobody's gonna show up, all it means is you know, my wrist is gonna get tired from signing orders. So we tried that, and in one less than 30-day period, I heard, technically, I didn't have to hear much, but over 6,000 cases on my docket in less than 30 days.
Wow.
I issued 5,488 orders of removal from people who never showed. Now, those orders of removal are outstanding, as are 650,000 other final orders of removal. And they don't come to the attention of ICE. They don't go out and look for them. They come to the attention of ICE if they get pulled over for DUI in a jurisdiction that is willing to call ICE and contact them and recognize a detainer. And various counties in Florida will recognize that, and some will not. There are some counties in Florida that have an agreement with ICE under 287G, and they have a relationship, and they'll work with ICE. But we all know from what we're hearing about that there's a great many places that are sanctuary jurisdictions that just don't do that. So where you are when you come into accidental contact, if you will, with the police, even though they run your background real quick and find that you've got a final order of removal, where you're located determines whether they can actually put you on a plane and send you away. That's the system we have currently. And the president has endeavored to make changes to that and to alter it in some ways by administrative action, executive orders. And he hadn't been able to do that because, by and large, federal judges, mostly in the Ninth Circuit, as soon as he issues an executive order, negate it. And for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals follows up on that, stops him from doing it. So what's needed is meaningful, true change in the Immigration and Nationality Act, that same place I told you that's been passed in the 50s and modified scores of times. We do know that Senator Graham, in just the last day or two, has introduced a limited piece of legislation. Now, it only addresses the issues on the border. But what he wants to do is change the asylum laws. Now, this is a congressional action that would have to be done with the Democrats. This isn't a sweeping immigration change, but it deals with our problem at the border. And he wants to require that for designated Central American countries, in order to seek asylum in the United States, you have to do it through an embassy in your country. If you make it to our border and you try to seek asylum, it will be statutorily denied because you didn't follow the legislative requirement of pursuing it in your own country. He's also trying to hire 500 more immigration judges to attract the background. He wants to legislatively create a permission to keep family-related immigration cases up to 100 days instead of the 20 days that the courts have required, so that they could hopefully, with new immigration judges, actually hear those cases. And again, they aren't, for the most part, there are certainly some that are very deserving, and the facts speak to themselves, but for the most part, they're not going to seek asylum. And his goal in this is that if the message gets down to their home countries, folks, it isn't going to get you released into the country to disappear. They'll stop coming. And you're not just going to stop them with a wall. You're going to have to change. I hate to ever use Richard Nixon as an example, but somebody asked him once before Watergate if he wasn't bothered by the fact that we had border guards on our southern border. And he said, I tell you what, I'll be worried if we have guards that are required to keep our people in. That's when I worry about our nation, not keeping people out. I'm going to close, or at least head toward closure, with an example on this issue of where we ought to be with immigration. And I'm going to do so in this gathering of Republican people. I'm going to talk about a Democrat. Shortly after amnesty was passed in 1986, later on the Immigration Nationality was amended, and it mandated, in this particular case, that Congress set up a commission to address immigration policies and present recommendations on what we need to do as a nation to address our immigration issues. It was headed by a former congresswoman from Texas by the name of Barbara Jordan. That's Barbara Jordan of Watergate and Nixon impeachment fame. A woman of first black female congresswoman from the South as an example. And if you ever had the pleasure of hearing her speak, one of the most eloquent speakers in history. In mid-1995, the commission had not completed its work. It had not issued its work, but they'd done what they were going to do. They knew where they were going. And she discovered she was dying of leukemia. So she called a press conference, and you can find that press conference. And she had the press conference to announce the findings and recommendations of the commission, even though they hadn't formally been issued. And if you watch the conference, you can see she's not talking from a prepared document. She's grabbing documents from here and papers from here and written notes from here. And why was she doing that? Because she knew she wasn't going to live, and she didn't want them screwing with the findings after she was dead. And it's very, very impressive. So what did this lifelong, dedicated, respected Democrat reveal and recommend? Open borders, expanded family immigration, comprehensive immigration reform? Nope. Her recommendations, if adopted today by a Democrat, would make her and that Democrat a pariah to the Democratic Party. She started with an assertion that is, quote, "It is both a right and a responsibility of a democratic society to manage immigration so that it serves the national interest." Further, she stated, quote, "Amnesty and comprehensive immigration reform is a road to poverty and lawlessness." And another great quote from her that I really like seems quite relevant today with respect to immigration. Should the priority of leadership be to improve the lives of U.S. citizens or allow corrupt regimes to export their poverty to the United States?
Wow.
Oh, that's deep.
Powerful.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
That's exactly what's going on.
Her recommendations affirmatively were to improve family immigration by reducing it to the nuclear family. We're one of only 2 nations in the world that permit siblings, brothers and sisters, to petition their other siblings and their families to come to the United States. Nobody else does that. When we talk about chain migration, we're talking about our ability to bring in so many family members. Now, her goal was to restrict it to the nuclear family, but if you get rid of the others, it will permit immediate family members to immigrate here more quickly. They don't have to wait 6 and 8 years. They can come here within a year or 2. So she recognized the need to address and limit chain migration, though she did not use those words. No siblings, no grown children. She recognized that a focus on merit and the ability of professional and skilled workers. She said arrivals should benefit, not burden the nation. And an appropriate limitation she felt on a number of refugees. But her essential theme was America first, no open borders, limit chain migration, and no reward for breaking the immigration laws by entering illegally. Now, does that sound like a Democrat, or does that sound like a president?
Sounds like a
Sounds
racist.
Sounds like a president.
And if you heard him talk
Definitely
today,
racist.
if you heard him talk,
She's joking.
She's joking.
Oh, yeah, he's not
I'm sorry, I didn't-
close.
She said
I
she's
said
definitely
she's definitely
racist.
racist.
She's
oh,
just
that's
joking.
you
Yeah,
got
she's black. How's that?
You got it. There's a reason. Barbara Jordan may be lost to the Democrats, but she's not lost to President Trump. In January 2018, he declared a Barbara Jordan Day.
Wow.
Right about the time that they came out with the first proposal to address some immigration reform.
Wow.
The president's,
He's so cool.
one of the, I think, legitimate questions is, if those issues were addressed today, or offered today, and some of them are by the president today, the middle-class American voter, regardless of party, who would that voter be attracted to? Open borders or an approach like Barbara Jordan suggested? My suggestion would be to anyone who asks, and nobody terribly does, would be to adopt, as Republicans, if you will, or folks who are concerned about immigration, those policies. And Barbara Jordan was an icon of the Democratic Party. But it tells you how far the Democrat Party has changed, how far they have gone. And I suggest to you that most voters, most middle-of-the-road voters, are not interested in how far that party has changed. The President's announcement today of a proposed immigration plan, it's just a plan, it's not a piece of legislation. It doesn't result in a reduction in the total numbers of immigrants into the United States. And conservatives don't like that. They want the 1,000,001 folks that are coming in every year to be reduced by about half. And it doesn't do that. But it does reverse the percentage of family versus merit-based immigration. There are currently about 66% of visas that are issued in the United States on an annual basis are family. About 12% are merit-based. The rest come from diversity and from refugees. Essentially, his proposal reverses that, just about double. 12% on family, 60% on merit-based. And they've set up this, there are no specifics on it, so there's no way to define it yet. But the idea is that you set up a set of criteria, education, language, job offer, that an individual can meet that will result in the ability of a company to be able to more easily immigrate that person to the United States, as opposed to just having to wait and see. One of the ideas of it is in order to you get certain points for certain things. Again, language, the ability to pass a civics test, to know our history, if you will, much like you have to do to become a citizen.
Ask AOC.
What's that?
Just ask AOC if you want to know about our history.
Yeah, that's right. She's an expert. So in any event, he also offered today, essentially he was mimicking Senator Graham's proposal of what we need to do about the border. They also want those kind of changes. It doesn't address, it's totally quiet on what to do with the DACA folks and with the 11 to 18 million undocumented folks who are here and what we do about it. And we can all have our views, conservative, liberal, of what to do about those folks, but I would tell you, I would opine, it's my view at least, that we're not going to send those folks away. Nobody's going to go out and round up 18 million people or 11 million people and shove them over the border. It's not going to happen, not in this lifetime, no. They're going to have to figure out a proposal that does something between what Democrats generally would want to do, which is to essentially grant them the same amnesty without calling it that they had back in '86, or what perhaps conservatives could agree to, which is don't grant them amnesty, which is the same as a path to citizenship, but grant them, and I'm not talking about the pure DACA kids now. And by DACA for a kid, they had to have come here under the age of 31. But don't get me started on DACA. But the idea being that they would get essentially the same thing, was deferred action, which means we're not coming after them unless they do something else wrong, and they get work authorization, they can live openly, they can pay their taxes, they get everything except permanent residency, which leads to citizenship. For the DACA folks, I suggest that the reason that his whole proposal is quiet on that is he knows he's going to have something to bargain with. And DACA and comprehensive immigration reform, as they like to refer to it, is where they're heading as a general matter. I happen to think that, as I said, that you can handle the undocumented folks by permitting them to remain here and be out in the open, but not giving them the reward of residency that leads to citizenship. If as a consequence of their kids becoming citizens and being 21 years of age, they can then have them petition them and become a resident, okay, that's what it allows. But just by coming here illegally, you're not rewarding them with that. At least that's my view. So if there's any hope of any bipartisan approach to handling what's going on both at the border and here, and I don't have a lot of faith in that, mind you, I would submit to you that that's what you try to do. Excuse me. How large the DACA pool is not, you decide by how you define who is a DACA person. They have to have been here by a certain age, entered by a certain date, and had no criminal convictions and been to school or graduated from school. All you have to do to broaden the pool, excuse me, is change the age, change the date. It's all a creature of the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Hope is
Oh,
coming.
thank you.
That happens to
Apologize.
me. That happens to
Apologize
me.
for
I
talking
know.
too long. In any event, I'm going to leave you with one name to just take a look at in your leisure. He is a researcher and writer for the Center for Immigration Studies. His name is Todd Bensman. And he's not a library guy. He goes to the Hungarian border to see how a fence worked in that country. He's gone down and walked with the caravans down there to see if he could. His focus primarily, when it comes to caravans, is on the presence of potential terrorists within, not so much on the Central Americans. But to do that, he's had to go down and interview these people. Anyway, he's a good writer. He writes a great deal, and he's worth looking at for those. Todd Bensman.
Bensman.
B-E-N-S-M-A-N. Good fella, good writer. So with that, I'm going to conclude my comments and take any questions that you might have. I hope I've provided some information for you that's helpful.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
If you're online watching and you'd like to ask a question, type it quickly and I will ask
The
it because I
question
can see
again,
it.
what do we do with the 11 to 18 million that are here?
Oh, no, I gotta get him water, Trish.
Everybody enforce employment laws and not give them benefits like crazy, free schooling, free healthcare, money.
As a practical
They
matter,
would go back home on their own.
I don't dispute that. But do I think that that's ever achievable as a practical matter with the current court system that we have? I don't. But I don't disagree with you. I mean, the thing about amnesty, when they passed it in 1986, they promised, all we're gonna do this is one time, we'll never do it again. We're not gonna let employers hire people anymore illegally, and that will stop the moth to the flame, them wanting to come here for what they can get for nothing from here. That hasn't worked. There were 3 million folks granted amnesty in 1986. We got 11 to 18 million now, so obviously it hasn't worked.
We didn't do those other things.
No, we did not do those other
Right.
things.
Well,
That's
that's what
exactly
we
right.
need to do.
No, you're preaching to the choir.
Now, the other question I have is about the anchor babies.
Yeah.
I couldn't find it in this, I'm not familiar with this issue of it, but I'm trying to find where it talks about. It says, somebody born in this country of parents who are under the jurisdiction of this country,
United States, yeah.
the United States, are citizens. Illegals are not under.
Well, they are under the jurisdiction of the United States. I don't happen to disagree with the court case that established that in the 1800s, but it is the law of the land, and unless the Supreme Court agrees to revisit that question, and you're focusing exactly on the part of the law that's in question, whether they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. However, anchor babies per se are not the problem that they used to be. It used to be that a woman in Matamoros could come over the border, have the baby, and that 3-month-old child could petition the entire family to come here and they could immigrate. They changed the law. They can still do that, but not until the child turns 21. So the folks who are primary violators or pursuing anchor baby issues are the Chinese.
Yeah.
They'll come over here and have the baby, go back to China because they know they've got the ultimate ability in the long term and as they get older to come to the United States. But I don't disagree with in terms of your interpretation of the statute that the courts do. So until that changes, if it does, we're stuck with that.
What about the courts? When Trump attempted to stop immigration from certain countries because of, and Obama had done that for some other countries during
Yeah.
his 8 years, and nobody squawked. Why did these judges, they from Timbuktu could make a decision from a district, a federal district judge, not anywhere close to the district where this happened, basically ruling that covers the whole country. That's stupid.
I agree.
And
And
why
you're
are-
talking
why
about,
are-
you're talking about the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit is the most overturned circuit in the United States, period.
Has
But
been
it
for
doesn't,
many years.
it doesn't matter, because what they can do in the short term is limit the ability of the president to implement the policies that he's trying to do. You can't fix it.
Well, the Congress could have done something, could it?
Well, you can fix it by who you appoint as judges in the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah,
Well, Congress, since Congress has the authority to establish these courts,
Absent
they
this,
could have
absent this.
passed a resolution that would limit their,
Yeah, no, I understand.
Great questions.
And you're not wrong at all. But Congress means Congress on both sides of the houses, and that's our problem.
I think we have a question over here from Susan.
Ma'am,
At what point did it become so beneficial for the illegals to stay here? Like, at what point did they start getting free phones and free food and all the free stuff we give them? Has it always been that way, or was there a point where?
no, there were times in the 70s when there were limitations placed on the ability to use medical facilities in hospitals, and there were the ability to go to public schools unless you were lawful. And the courts ruled that it was an unconstitutional limitation to do that, and so that has led to, just snowballed into the other rights that you have. They don't have a right to Social Security benefits unless they either entered legally or have a work authorization, and that you can't get that just because you want to in most places. So it's come over time. It's certainly, but it's such that it's pretty well expected. There are lots of folks that don't. They most assuredly, if they don't have any place else to go, the emergency rooms are crammed with them, right here. I mean, that's where they get their medical care if they don't have anything else, and they can't be stopped.
But
wicked.
in the
Right, yeah.
schools, you know, they've got iPhones and they've got.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I miss that when we as a country decided it was okay to give them everything for free.
We as a country didn't. States have. You gotta remember, a lot of these issues are state-driven, not federally driven. There's no federal rule that says somebody's gotta have an iPhone, but there are states that say if you are within a certain poverty guideline and receiving certain benefits, you get X benefits. And
Even if you're illegal.
regardless of what your status is, they don't ask.
They don't ask?
They don't ask. They're almost
Wow.
very, very, very seldom do you have any kind of benefit or anything that you're seeking that in which the question, are you lawfully in the United States, is asked, or do you have lawful status? It just doesn't happen.
huh.
Well, then why do they even ask about the poverty level? Why don't we just all get free cell phones?
Well, that's a poverty guideline question, not an immigration question.
That was a-
I have a question.
Yes, sir?
Maybe you can debunk it for me or give us the facts. Your child, give us your form, your child, your huddle passes, which you have to have written on the Statute of Liberty. Now, wasn't that made after, it wasn't given to us from France with that? Wasn't that by an illegal, not an illegal, an immigrant who wrote that after?
Yeah, that wasn't a part of the statute of
Suppose.
liberty.
It had nothing to do with the Statute of Liberty.
That was put in afterwards.
Okay, and the last paragraph says pretty much, unless you hate America, you don't belong here. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, that part I don't know when it came. I thought that was added later, but I don't know for sure. But I know it wasn't on the statute of liberty that was originally given to us.
Hottie.
So if we give these kids, these DACA kids, you know, the amnesty, that what's to prevent another issue with more DACAs in the future?
Well,
Well, that
in
won't-
order to do that, this is gonna have to be a statutory fix. And the statutory fix, the other side of the coin of that statutory fix is, you gotta have as a part of this law, this, not just promised, this can statutorily never happen again. You can never receive any benefit in the United States unless you are lawfully admitted to this country. That has to be a part of it, in my view.
Yep, yep. It goes back to what he was
Yeah.
talking about.
All right, I've bored you enough.
It was riveting. It was riveting.
Important.
Are we, no more questions?
Let me tell you one other thing. any of you here when I did the Rotary? Okay. You remember the Kavanaugh hearings?
Yes.
You remember all the questions about, oh, you ought to have another FBI investigation even though he's had 6
Yes.
background investigations. So when I got this nomination, this FBI agent came over and he said, we have to do this big background investigation on you. And I was still on active duty at the time, and I said, sir, I said, I've got a clearance way higher than what, in the military, than what I need for this job. Because I didn't want to have to go through the deal again and admit everything I ever did wrong. I said, why don't we just go over to the NSA and pull my file and just update it? He said, well, Judge, he said, I don't have a clearance high enough to look at your file, and the NSA won't let the FBI in the building. I said, okay, we got to do it again. So I had to go through all that stuff. And what happens when they go out is the FBI agent who I deal with comes back every so often, and he asks a clarifying question, or he'll tell me something that they looked at, or it's whatever. So he liked this one. He came back and he said, Judge, he said, we had an agent go out to your hometown, little bitty hometown in Kansas where you were born, and they talked to your neighbors from the time you were 5. And I said, oh my God. He said that they talked to Mrs. Buzzkirk, your next door neighbor. I said, Lord, Lord. What did Mrs. Buzzkirk say? He said, she said you'd be in front of a judge, but you'd never be one. Anything else? He said, yes, she said you beat up her son every day of his life. And I said, until he became my blocking fullback, yes. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, everybody, for watching on Facebook Live, and I will make sure this gets permanently posted. If you've been tagged, if you wish to be tagged so that you can find it more easily, please just let me know.
Roz Lesser said it was riveting, and boy, was it ever riveting. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Mr. Roberts.